This will be the third campaigning summit I've been to. Was in Vienna last year or the year before. I was also in Berlin, and it's really fantastic to sort of not only meet folks doing what you all do in Europe, but I really love sort of engaging on what similarities we have in the U.S. to what you all do here, and also many of the differences. Yuri gave a great introduction, a little bit about campaigns and elections. I'll just take about 30 seconds to give a slight history of who we are and what we do in the U.S. Campaigns and Elections was founded in 1980 by a man by the name of Stanley Foster Reed. And he actually founded Campaigns and Elections as a journal to, small d, democratize the process of running for office in the United States. When we were founded, about 1980, it was sort of the start of what now is a booming industry of political campaigning in the U.S. But around this time, there were a small handful of political consultants that were operating in the U.S. Most of them were major media buyers, and if you were a candidate who wanted to run for say a school board or a city council or a local government somewhere, even state legislature in the U.S., you could not afford professional help. The consultants that were out there were really only selling their services for Senate campaigns and federal elections. So Campaigns and Elections was founded as a resource for people in the U.S. who wanted to run for local office and didn't know where to start. And so a subscription to Campaigns and Elections was a solution to that problem. Today we've evolved to not only still providing that sort of content on our website for folks who want to enter the political process, who want to run for office, but also we migrated that to a number of conferences and events we do, everything from campaign technology to candidates who want to know sort of the latest and the greatest in the campaigning world. Before I put this presentation together, I consulted a lot of people in the U.S. smarter than I on sort of what are the biggest highlights from the presidential campaign, and kind of started with a couple of takeaways from all the major campaigns that I think are particularly relevant. Just a show of hands, how many of you would say you're closely following the U.S. presidential election? Okay. How many of you, among those who are following it, are surprised at how well Donald Trump has done? Okay, I'm one of you. And we've got many of us in the campaign industry in the U.S. Let's start with 4 campaigns that I think are the most interesting in terms of what they've managed to do over the course of the early primary. Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, started as a candidate who, frankly, a lot of folks did not expect was going to emerge as the kind of conservative alternative that he has now emerged as. Where we are in the primary process now, there's a good argument to be made that Ted Cruz is possibly the only candidate who could beat Donald Trump before this sort of primary season ends, unless we go into a contested convention, which is just such a mess I don't even want to imagine it. A couple of important things that the Cruz campaign has done from the digital side. They've generated a lot of interest in how they're using data. And frankly, one of the reasons we know what they've done is because the campaign's been very open. It's probably been the most open of any campaigns on the Republican side, or frankly the Democratic side, about some of the things some of the ways they've used data and analytics to say and target their voters. After his win in Iowa, where he beat Donald Trump by a considerable margin in Iowa, a lot was written about the data analytics approach that the Cruz campaign took there. They hired a firm called Cambridge Analytica. It's a London-based data firm. One of the founders of this company is a major donor to the Cruz campaign. And Cambridge has an interesting goal, and has had an interesting goal. They want to create essentially a psychographic profile of every American voter. They are attempting to essentially sort U.S. voters into one of many personality types, and by doing so, actually give campaigns the ability, in this case the Cruz campaign, to target very tailored and very specific messages to certain segments of voters, not only based on where you fall on the ideological spectrum, not only based on what issues are important to you, but specifically tailored messages based on your personality type. So the Cruz campaign did this in Iowa. Iowa is, in terms of who votes in the Iowa caucus, relatively small. We're not talking about a giant universe of Republicans who caucus in Iowa. The Cruz campaign managed to create some 150 individual segments of voters in Iowa, and they targeted through these segments. Some of these segments were as small as 60 voters that the Cruz campaign identified as caring about a particular issue. One example is there was a proposed statewide ban on fireworks in Iowa. The Cruz campaign found about 61 or 63 voters, or potential voters, in Iowa who really cared about this issue. And so talk about getting really granular with your targeting and your issue targeting. The really interesting thing that they did in Iowa, and they continue to do, although it's a bit harder when it gets to scale, is they said, listen, we've got 5 different personality types that Cambridge has identified. They're sorting voters into whether you are more open, more extroverted, are you agreeable, are you in some ways neurotic? And you can have as many as 5 different messages on the same issue that will be targeted to voters based on where they fall on this personality spectrum. So it's the one question that I think for Cruz going forward is if you get to a general election and you've got an enormous number of states in which you have to compete, how do you sort of layer this data and figure out what segments are you going to be really going around state by state and dealing with 150, 200 segments of voters? A lot of that gets very difficult to then integrate into your various voter contact and so on. But it's very interesting the way Cruz has used this data, and particularly the psychographic stuff is to a scale on a presidential race that we haven't yet seen. On to Bernie Sanders, who is somebody that was, in some ways like Donald Trump, fairly underestimated at the start. Obviously, he's not that underestimated anymore. We've reached a point where not only has he been able to compete with Hillary Clinton, but he has built a small donor juggernaut in order to do so. It's hard to underestimate what small donors have done for Bernie Sanders. They've turned his campaign into a powerhouse that can now compete with Hillary Clinton, who was supposed to be the clear nominee. She was supposed to walk to the nomination. Of course, she was supposed to walk to the nomination in 2008 against Barack Obama. But as many people have pointed out, Bernie Sanders is no Barack Obama, and that's true. So I think people expected, even though there was liberal enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders over Hillary, that Bernie was not going to be able to generate this sort of grassroots enthusiasm. I think that the real interesting thing that Sanders has done, and he's got a terrific digital firm called Revolution Messaging that does all of his online fundraising, does a lot of his online messaging. And not only are they doing some unique things, but they are also, I think, creating a model for small dollar donors and online fundraising that is really even different than what Barack Obama did. Obviously, Obama did this really well in 2008. He did it even better in 2012. But Sanders has tied small dollar fundraising, online fundraising. It is the cause of his campaign. If you listen to Bernie, he talks about how he rejects big money in politics. He rejects the millionaires and the billionaires. He has no super PACs. And the fascinating thing that he's been able to do with his supporter base is, if you give a small dollar donation to Bernie Sanders, and it's become sort of legend on the campaign that his average donation is $27. Any Bernie Sanders rally, the crowd knows what's coming and they'll repeat it. So, Bernie will warm up the crowd and he'll say, "What's our average donation?" And everybody in the crowd will yell, $27. It's interesting because it is not just pulling people into the political process who might otherwise feel like they're crowded out by big dollar donors in the U.S. It has actually given his campaign a cause of its own. So I think that's a model for purely ideological candidates in the future, candidates that are running on single issue candidates. I mean, at the end of the day, Bernie is still in many ways a single issue candidate. He admits that. Bernie is not somebody who goes around and talks a lot about foreign affairs. He is not somebody who uses that as a strength. His campaign is essentially dealing with what he calls the plight of the middle class in the U.S. And that is his entire campaign. And I think they've ingeniously, completely sewn that together with his small dollar fundraising operation. The other thing that's noteworthy of what Bernie is doing, and I think this is something that other campaigns are going to have to look to in the future, they've been willing to empower, his army of digital supporters in a way that we've never seen a campaign do. Bernie Sanders has a lot of younger, tech-savvy supporters who started organizing for him outside of the campaign structure, not working for the campaign. A couple of Bernie Sanders supporters early on created a Reddit forum and actually recruited volunteers, recruited coders to help the campaign. Did all of this outside of the campaign structure. The interesting thing is the campaign has largely embraced that, and that's new in American politics. If you know anything about the consulting industry in the U.S., frankly, it is very insular. They are a group that thinks they pretty much know everything about running campaigns, or they pride themselves on knowing everything about running campaigns. And when a younger, much less a tech-savvy millennial comes along and says, actually, I think I could build a better tool than the company that is being paid handsomely to build an online tool, typically that's rejected and that's scorned. The Sanders campaign has taken a completely different approach there. The digital director of the campaign, actually holds conference calls with Bernie supporters that create apps for the campaign, help sort of recruit supporters and volunteers online. The campaign has even, when they're in need of something on the tech side, they've even gone out to this community that operates outside of the campaign and said, hey, we're looking for a volunteer who's a great coder and who might be able to help us with X application, or we're looking for something to be created from scratch. There's two sides to that. There's one, I think, particularly interesting example of an application that was built outside the campaign is something called Bernie B&B, where it essentially is an Airbnb for Bernie Sanders supporters or their volunteers going state to state, so Bernie supportors in X state or locality will offer free accommodation to volunteers or supporters of the campaign. Obviously, there's a potential liability there, right? If you use Bernie B&B, it's very clear that you are signing away any liability that the campaign might have. So there is a push and pull between using tech folks that are outside of the traditional campaign infrastructure. But I think in the case of Bernie, it's benefited his campaign tremendously, and I think it is something that is again going to be something that campaigns on both sides of the aisle are going to take advantage of in the coming cycle. In fact, I think even in the general this year, I think more campaigns will look to folks outside the campaign structure and see what they can offer from the tech side as actually valuable. Hillary Clinton has some of the same enthusiasm among some of her tech-savvy supporters. She has not embraced it the same way that the Sanders campaign has, and I think that sort of illustrates her approach in general. Any Hillary Clinton campaign or any Hillary Clinton campaign effort is much more guarded, and her current campaign is that way as well. On the digital side, we don't know a heck of a lot about the ins and outs of the Clinton digital operation. They keep things very close to the vest. That's their style. What we do know is that they have built a highly skilled data gathering operation. Hillary Clinton's chief technology officer is a former Google executive. She has Obama digital alums working on her digital effort. They're also working with a company called The Groundwork, which is an effort started by Eric Schmidt, chairman of Alphabet, and the goal was to ensure that Hillary Clinton had the sort of engineering talent, the technical talent required to do what she needed to do in the general election. So we've got a lot of questions about exactly what The Groundwork is doing and who's involved in that effort. I think we'll probably get some of those once we get past the primary. We'll be able to shed a little more light on exactly what they're doing, but I think we can expect her campaign to be as guarded with technology in the general election, exactly what they're doing as they have been in the primary thus far. I think the other thing that it's clear that we can expect is with the number of Obama folks that are working on her campaign, there's a clear benefit there of those two successful, technologically innovative Obama campaigns that Hillary Clinton will benefit from. And I think you're going to see a very data-driven media effort. I'm going to touch on this in a couple of minutes, but a lot of talk in the U.S. about this campaign has been the weakening of, big spending on television. And the traditional campaign infrastructure being, or the traditional approach, being, we're going to spend millions on big television media buys. I think you're still going to very much see that in the general election, but I expect Hillary Clinton to improve upon even what Barack Obama was able to do in 2012 and find ways to layer in data and use their modeling to actually make the millions she will spend on television advertising much more efficient, getting to her voter targets in a way that does not require sort of just the traditional model of blasting millions on TV that we've seen in the U.S. So I think you're going to see a lot of efficiency in that effort. You're going to see Hillary Clinton optimize that media spend in the general. Here he is.
Finally.
Yeah. Is it too early for a drink?
Let's have a whiskey.
Yeah. How about that? Donald Trump. Where to start with a guy like Donald Trump? Let's for a second just strip away all of the craziness surrounding Donald Trump, and focus on a couple of things that really do make his campaign unique. He has completely thrown out the traditional model of running a presidential campaign in the U.S. And not just by the way he acts, not just by the crazy stuff he says, not just by the way he messages, but by the way he has constructed his presidential campaign. He doesn't like consultants. He hasn't really hired very many. He has hardly advertised on television. He's rejected the notion that he has to construct a traditional campaign infrastructure and spend money on it. All of which a lot of experts in the U.S. think is crazy, but frankly, he has been emboldened by it because of how well he has done throughout this primary process. And as we sit here today, he's hardly spent much money on television, yet he is pretty darn close to being the nominee of the Republican Party, which in many ways is astounding. I think the other thing that's notable about Donald Trump is, I frame it as, it's old media meets new. Donald Trump is the ultimate mass media candidate. He's constantly on TV. Cable networks in the United States have given him unprecedented coverage. They run every single Donald Trump campaign rally practically from start to finish. He's gotten the sort of mass media treatment in terms of exposure that I have never seen a modern presidential candidate in the U.S. get, and frankly, it's helped him tremendously. If he wasn't getting that mass media coverage, I'm not sure whether he'd get away with not spending any money on his actual campaign. And he's taken that, and what he does on social media, what he does on Twitter, amplifies his presence on the airwaves, on cable news, and everywhere else in the U.S. He is his insane self on Twitter. If you read his Twitter feed, it almost reads like a parody of a presidential candidate, because you read through it and you say there's no possible way that the front runner for a major party nomination in the U.S. can be saying this kind of crap on Twitter. Yet he does it hour by hour. And it reinforces his supporters. They love it. They go crazy for it. They think it's authentic. And it is authentic. In many ways, this is who he is. This is who he's chosen to be at the moment for his campaign. And I think it's, a lot of folks will come up and say, hey, listen, I don't think Donald Trump is, the sharpest knife in the drawer. Donald Trump's a pretty darn smart guy, actually. And the way he's melded old media and new and gotten the amount of exposure and gotten as far as he has, it's pretty astounding. And it's actually not done without skill, despite the shell of craziness that surrounds it all. Leads me to this question that I've gotten asked a lot, which is, does this campaign cycle in the U.S. suggest that, the role of money in politics is not what it used to be? And I answer that by saying yes and no. There's a few numbers that I want to run by you here that I think exemplify this big money versus small money question in this campaign. One I already mentioned, and that's the $27. That's the average Bernie Sanders contribution. Bernie Sanders, by the end of 2015, this guy raised $54 million in contributions of $200 or less. That's astounding. In the month of February of 2016 alone, he raised $43 million. Hillary Clinton, who is the establishment candidate, she's got all the big money backers on the Democratic side, she raised $30 million in the month of February. So Bernie Sanders is not only outraising her, he's outraising her by a stunning amount of money. And he's doing it with online small dollar donations. So in some ways it's small money, but it still translates into big money. Bernie Sanders can stand there and say, hey, listen, I'm the candidate of the middle class. I'm not reliant on super PACs. I'm not reliant on well-heeled donors. But the reality is, if he wasn't able to raise this amount of money, he would not be in the game right now the way he is. So big money is still relevant in U.S. campaigns and will remain so. The thing that folks point to the most about this cycle in terms of whether or not big money and traditional advertising works as well as it used to is this one here, $84 million. This was the amount of money spent by Jeb Bush's campaign and the super PAC supporting him combined on television advertising. $84 million. Jeb Bush's best finish was a 4th place in the New Hampshire primary, followed up by a distant 4th place in the South Carolina primary. Altogether, the Bush campaign and the super PAC supporting him raised and spent over $154 million. So in some ways, there is no better example of big money traditional campaigning gone awry than the Jeb Bush campaign. To be fair, the Jeb Bush campaign was saddled by a poor candidate. Objectively, Jeb Bush ran one of the worst presidential campaigns I have ever seen in the past few cycles. Whatever had propelled him years ago to successful campaigns as governor of Florida, he never recaptured that magic. I'm just going to quickly go through a couple more things. $494 million. This is the amount of money that through the end of January was raised by all candidates in the presidential race. That is supplemented by an additional $400 million that was raised by the super PACs and the outside groups supporting these candidates. And we're only in the early part of 2016 here. So while tactics may be changing, and indeed they are, money still plays an enormously crucial role in U.S. politics. 3 quick takeaways. The shift to digital campaigning, it will continue to accelerate this year. TV spend is projected to actually rise. Burrell Associates, which is the firm that sort of predicts advertising spend in the U.S., has anticipated that TV spending will rise about 18% in 16 over 4 years ago. They also predict, though, about $1 billion will be spent on digital advertising. You go back to 2008, that is a 5,000% increase over what was spent on digital in the 2008 presidential race. So it's increasing quickly. You're going to have to reach folks on digital. Hispanic voters, which in a lot of key battleground states are going to be huge in this election, they're much more mobile-centric than the general population in the U.S. Millennials, 60% of millennials don't have landlines. They're on cell phones. Majority of them consume media on smartphones and tablets. So if you are not properly using digital, you're going to be well behind. Real quickly, content is king, and I think it's going to be especially relevant in 2016. And I know Vince Harris is going to be talking later this afternoon about creating compelling content on every platform, whether it's Facebook Live or Twitter, and how we can use Snapchat and all the other platforms that candidates in the U.S. are on. But I think actually having an authentic voice, which Donald Trump in his own way does well, is going to be really important, because connecting to your supporters, making them feel part of your effort, is going to be key to your online content. And lastly, what I mentioned earlier around burning people power, I think that is going to expand. The idea that you need to rely on your supporters who are most enthusiastic about you and your campaign, and find ways to bring them into the campaign, find ways to make them feel empowered. I think one thing that we'll see a little bit this cycle, but I think we'll wait till next cycle to see it, is sort of virtual reality in campaigns. There are a few companies that are working with this idea of, how do I take a supporter and make them feel like they're at the election night rally using virtual reality? Make them present at the conventions. I think we'll see some of that in 16, but I think that experiential feeling is going to be really important moving forward, because you've got to bring your supporters in and make them feel like they're a part of your process and helping you